Question 1. The nature of the ego. I've been contemplating the nature of the ego and the idea of selflessness. What is the nature of the ego? Is it related to the restlessness I often feel? The ego is a mental construct that creates the illusion of separation between the individual and the ultimate reality. It's the part of the mind that identifies with thoughts, beliefs, memories, and experiences, creating a sense of I or me that feels distinct from the rest of existence. However, the ego is not a real, permanent, or independent entity. It's a temporary appearance within the larger context of pure consciousness or awareness. This awareness is the true self, or the witness, the unchanging background against which all experiences, including the ego, arise and subside. The restlessness you feel can be a symptom of the ego's constant need for stimulation, validation, and control. The ego is always seeking something to identify with or resist, leading to inner agitation. By recognizing the ego's illusory nature and resting in pure awareness, you can begin to transcend the ego and find a deeper peace. Question 2. The ego as a mental construct. So the ego isn't literally a little person in my head, it's more of a mental pattern? Exactly. The ego is a pattern of thinking and believing that creates the illusion of a distinct autonomous entity within the mind. It's not a physical object or a separate being residing in the brain. But this separate self is an illusion created by the mind. In reality, there's no division between the individual and the ultimate reality, or pure consciousness. The ego is merely a temporary appearance within this larger context, like a wave arising on the ocean surface. Question 3. Who has the illusion? If the ego creates the illusion of a separate self, who is experiencing this illusion? In truth, there is no separate who that has the illusion. The illusion of separation is not experienced by a separate self, because the separate self is itself part of the illusion. In reality, there is only the undivided, non-dual awareness or pure consciousness. This awareness is the true nature of all existence. When awareness becomes identified with the mind and its contents, it gives rise to the ego and the illusion of separation. But the ego is not a real entity that experiences the illusion. Rather, it is the illusion itself. The illusion of separation is the ego, and the ego is the illusion of separation. When the illusion is seen through, it becomes clear that there is no separate who that has the illusion. There is only the seamless reality of pure awareness, within which the play of existence unfolds. Question 4. The self-story. So the illusory self is maintained by the mind constantly recycling a story of who I am and my experiences through time. Yes, that's a very accurate way of putting it. The mind continually generates thoughts, memories, and narratives that reinforce the idea of a distinct continuous self existing across time. This self-story is woven from the body's experiences, relationships, accomplishments, failures, beliefs, and so on. As the mind repeatedly revisits these narratives, it strengthens the illusion of a separate self. The self-story becomes a habit of thinking, a mental pattern that feels real and substantial. But when examined closely, this self-story is seen as a construct of the mind, not a fundamental reality. The self that appears in these narratives is not a fixed, permanent entity, but rather a fluid, ever-changing appearance within consciousness. Question 5. The story of the body. So the story of my body and its experiences through time did happen, but it didn't happen to anyone. It's just the story of the body. Precisely. The story of the body and its experiences through time is true in the sense that it describes events that occurred. However, these events did not happen to a separate, independent self. These did not happen to some character in the mind. The body and its experiences are real appearances within consciousness. The body is born, grows, interacts with the world, undergoes various experiences, and eventually dies. All of these events are part of the natural unfolding of existence. But the idea that there is a separate self who owns these experiences, who is the central character in the story, is where the illusion lies. The mind creates a narrative around these experiences, casting the self as the protagonist, but this self is ultimately a mental construct. In reality, the experiences simply arise within pure awareness, without belonging to anyone. The body and its story are appearances within consciousness, like everything else in the universe. They have no independent existence apart from the undivided whole. So while the story of the body is true in the conventional sense, it's not the whole truth. The deeper truth is that there is no separate self experiencing this story. There is only the undivided reality of pure awareness, within which the story of the body and all other appearances arise and subside.
Question 6. Identification with the body and mind. I think the confusion arises because we believe we are the body and the mind. We think, this is my body, my thoughts, my personality, and so that must be who I am. But you're saying that's an illusion, even though the personality and body do exist?
Yes, that's precisely where the confusion arises. The belief that we are the body and the mind is so deeply ingrained that it feels self-evident. We automatically identify with the body's thoughts, feelings, and experiences, assuming this is who we are. But identification is the root of the illusion. While there is indeed a body and a personality associated with it, the belief that this body-mind complex is our true identity is where the misunderstanding lies. The body and personality are real in a relative sense. They exist as patterns of energy and information within the larger field of consciousness. The body has physical characteristics, and the mind has thoughts, opinions, and tendencies that form a unique psychological profile. These are the facts of our conventional existence. However, the error is in assuming that these facts define our fundamental nature. Our true self is not limited to or defined by the body-mind complex. Rather, our true nature is the pure awareness within which the body and mind appear. This awareness is not confined to the individual body or mind, but is the universal, undivided consciousness that underlies all existence. It is the common ground of all experience, the unchanging witness of all that arises and passes away. When we identify with the body and mind, we feel separate, limited, and vulnerable. We become caught up in the drama of the ego, with its fears, desires, and conflicts. But when we recognize our true nature as pure awareness, we discover a sense of freedom, peace, and wholeness that transcends the confines of the individual self. So while it's true that you have a personality and a body, that this is not the whole story. Beyond the relative reality of the body-mind complex lies the absolute reality of pure awareness, which is your true identity. The challenge is to recognize this deeper truth and live from this understanding, even as we navigate the relative world of form and change.
Question 7. The illusory self-awareness. So even if the personality is real, the personality or the illusion of self in the mind is not aware of its own existence? It's just a recycling of thoughts and memories, and there's no one actually there?
The personality or the illusion of self in the mind is not a conscious, aware entity. It is, as you've pointed out, a recycling of thoughts, memories, and conditioned patterns of the mind. There is no actual person or self behind these mental processes. The mind creates the illusion of a self by constantly referencing past experiences, imagining future scenarios, and weaving a narrative around these mental contents. This narrative creates the impression of a continuous, solid self that persists through time. However, when we look closely at our experience, we find that this self is not a tangible, locatable entity. It is merely a concept, a product of the mind's tendency to create a sense of identity. In reality, thoughts, memories, and experiences simply arise and pass away within consciousness, without belonging to anyone. They are like clouds passing through the sky. They appear, linger for a while, and then dissolve back into the empty expanse of awareness. The self that we take to be the thinker of thoughts, the experiencer of experiences, and the owner of memories is itself just another thought arising in consciousness. It is not a real, independent entity that is aware of its own existence. This is why non-duality teachings often emphasize that there is no separate I or me behind the mind's activities. The sense of personal identity is a mental construct, not a fundamental reality. When we look for the self that we assume to be the center of our experience, we find only a flux of changing thoughts and perceptions with no solid core. So, while the personality and the sense of self may seem very real and compelling from the perspective of the mind, they are ultimately illusory. They are the mind's creation, not the fundamental nature of what we are. By seeing through this illusion and recognizing the impersonal nature of all experience, we can begin to disidentify from the narrow sense of self and rest in the vast, open awareness that is our true nature.
Question 8. The fear of non-existence. I think it's the fear of non-existence that most of us feel when we discover there is no one there. It's like, okay, now what do I do? There's no one to do anything.
You've touched on a profound and common reaction to the realization of selflessness. The fear of non-existence, or the sense that if there is no self, then there is nothing left, can be a very strong and unsettling experience. This fear arises because we have been so conditioned to identify with the ego, the sense of being a separate, controlling self. The ego's existence is predicated on the belief in its own reality, so when this belief is challenged, it can feel like the ground is being pulled out from under us. However, the absence of a separate self does not equate to non-existence. Rather, it points to a more expansive, inclusive sense of being that is not limited to the narrow confines of the ego. When we realize that we are not the separate self that we thought we were, it can indeed feel like a kind of death. But it is the death of an illusion, not the death of our true nature. What dies is the false sense of being a separate, isolated entity. What is revealed is the vast, open awareness that is our shared being. In this realization, we may indeed feel a sense of disorientation or groundlessness. The usual reference points of I and me are no longer solid, and we may feel like we don't know how to navigate life without a separate self at the helm. But as we rest in the openness of our true nature, we find that life continues to unfold naturally, without the need for a separate controller. Decisions are made, actions are taken, experiences are had, but without the overlay of a separate self claiming ownership of these processes. This can be a challenging transition, as we learn to trust the natural intelligence of life and to let go of the ego's need for control. But as we do so, we may find a new sense of freedom, ease, and intimacy with all of existence. So while the realization of selflessness can be frightening at first, it is ultimately a doorway to a more expansive, authentic way of being. It is not the end of existence, but the beginning of a life lived in alignment with our deepest truth. Created by Elias Stasinos. Hit the like button and subscribe if you found this useful.